This is Eagle Owl, and today I'll be talking about Sidney Brown. Yes, it's goofy list time. People have him as our worst draft pick of last year. Also, we got to talk about Jalen Hurts being a victim of a broken system. And lastly, we got to talk about a potential trade with the Texans. But let's get straight into it. All right, man. It's list season. We just gonna hop straight into it because I seen the list floating around on the Instagram sphere, I should say, not Twitter sphere, but the Instagram spheres, and it got a lot of comments because they came out with a list of the top 10 worst draft picks or the last 10 worst draft picks, and I had the list up here. So it has Eric Rowe. You could agree with that. Eric Rowe was successful other places. Like he was good in Miami. I believe he went to the Chiefs and was good, but he just never got his footing with the Eagles. So I kind of get that. Wendell Smallwood, he was good for us. He was decent, well, a fifth round pick. He was decent. Okay. You can justify it. Sidney Jones, yeah. Sidney Jones has so much potential, but that ACL, man, he just couldn't get over it. Matt Pryor, yeah, 2018 was a solid draft class, even though it was only four picks. Think about it. It was Dallas Goddard, Avante Maddox, Josh Sweat, and then there was Matt Pryor. And Matt Pryor, again, was solid. So if we had to pick between the four, yeah, gotta go Matt Pryor. I'm sorry, Matt Pryor. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, just a complete bust. So we get that. Jalen Rager, just a complete bust. Get that too. This is where it get sketchy. So you had Zach McPherson. Even though Zach McPherson, I was never the biggest fan of him, but to call him the worst draft pick in 2021, where you got guys like I think Jacoby Stevens was in his draft class, like guys like him who never even played a snap. But you got Zach McPherson. I get it. And one of the reasons he's justified that is because he like, well, Zach McPherson got hurt and he never lived up to his potential. So you can, go off that, because then if you go into the later rounds, like I mentioned, Jacoby Stevens, not to hop on him, he never got his foot in, but at the same time, he was a sixth round pick. So you could somewhat justify that. So this is why I say you got to get rookies at least 3 years, because he got Nakobe Dean next. I just think it's unfair. I think it's unfair to have Nakobe Dean there. I get it. You got Jordan Davis and Cam Jurgens and stuff doing their thing, looking like they are going to be potential, Pro Bowlers, and then Nakobe Dean is, let's see what, falling off. But 2022 draft class, you still had a jury out like on Grant Calcaterra. Will he be the guy? And it's like it's other guys in that draft class where it's those like, will they finally step up? Like again, like a Grant Calcaterra. But Nakobe Dean, this to me comes off as shock value because Nakobe Dean name is up there, and people gonna be like, "What, Nakobe Dean?" And it seemed like they wanted the engagement for that. But have Nakobe Dean lived up to potential yet? No. But at the same time, he's going into year three. Me personally, I give rookies 3 to 4 years. I know a lot of people give them 2 or even 1 year, but Nakobe Dean, the injuries did slow him down, and the guy even explained that, well, Nakobe Dean is the injury thing. He went into that bag, the injury bag, and again, Nakobe Dean, you just got to give him more time. Just give him a little bit more time. We did bring in a Devin White. You did draft a Trotter Jr. So the heat is on. The heat is on Nakobe Dean for sure. But to say he's the worst, again, you got some guys in that draft class, I think that can potentially be worse than him. But the first two picks, they hit hard. I ain't gonna lie, them first two picks, Jordan Davis and then Cam Jurgens, yeah, those some picks, and then you go into Kobe Dean. If you had to compare the three, yeah, sure, but it's bigger than the three. And then this is where it gets extremely goofy, right? So you got Sidney Brown, and again, you went to the injury bag. Well, Sidney Brown got hurt, but Sidney Brown got hurt towards the end of the season, and Sidney Brown was drafted to probably one of the worst defensive coordinators, and he showed life. He showed life. It's certain guys at some point you just stop looking at the defensive scheme. You just start looking at who has potential? Sidney Brown, Milton Williams, Nolan Smith showed what he can do. And it's like, bro, again, this was just last year. That's why I'm saying you have to give rookies at least 3 years. But to me, Sidney Brown was not the worst pick. See, look, I don't even want to mention names because they still got to develop. Like Nolan Smith still has to develop, so I can't put him up there. Keely Ringo got hot towards the end of the season, but Sidney Brown stayed pretty much consistent of showing promise. But again, they were rookies last year. They were rookies. Like, of course, Jalen Carter just took off. And it's like, bro, Sidney Brown is not the worst. If you had to make a case, I'll put him behind Jalen Carter, who showed the most promise. It'd be Jalen Carter, Sidney Brown, and Keely Ringo, who showed the most promise as the top three. But to call Sidney Brown the worst in his draft class, that no, because of a tear ACL towards the end of the season. No, no way. No way, Sidney Brown. It's the worst. And he was the second best safety. You know, he was still behind the guy in Detroit, which I still believe. I still believe he will be better than the guy in Detroit. I do. It's Sidney Brown. Give him time to heal up. Give him some playing time. Sidney Brown's future is really, really bright. But bro, the call him the worst draft pick of last year is insane to me. That come off as engagement farming, clickbait, all types of stuff. No way. No way. We talking about the guy again that showed possibly the most promise. All right, so I want to go into too deep into that. Let's talk about Jalen Hurts. To me, him being victim of a broken scheme or a broken system. So PFF put out like a rating of quarterbacks who were the best at throwing intermediate, passes. That's between like 10 and 19 yards. And Lamar Jackson was one, and Jalen Hurts was two. And seeing this makes me sick to my stomach because he was a victim of a broken system. And I say that because it was either, oh, go for the bomb or go for the wide receiver screen. Bomb, wide receiver screen. Bomb, wide receiver screen. And what makes the wide receiver screen even worse, Devontae Smith, you lead block on these wide receiver screens. And he had to miss a game because eventually he got hurt. Because Devontae Smith is not no lead blocker on wide receiver screens. So Jalen Hurts, and you look at the numbers, and when you're talking to Nick Sirianni and Brian Johnson, and you tell them like, bro, we need more intermediate routes, stuff like that, and they say no, basically, is insane to me. It's crazy to me. And that's why when Jalen Hurts said like, yo, it's 95% change, you gotta scrap it. You gotta scrap it because again, Jalen Hurts, PFF is saying, yeah, he's good at these things, this thing, throwing in the middle of the field. It looks good. But Brian Johnson and Nick Sirianni is like, nah, we're going to keep it on the boundaries, keep throwing it deep. After it was figured out, never changed anything up. Nick Sirianni is not the best play caller. And then you got Brian Johnson, who is inexperienced. So it was just a disaster waiting to happen. And you would think going into the season, like Brian Johnson got so much knowledge under a Shane Steichen. Nick Sirianni learned how to take the back seat. This is what a lot of Eagles fans were thinking. So we thinking like, yeah, it should work. And unfortunately it didn't. Now I like Brian Johnson like as a quarterback coach and developing guys, but him play calling, I'm not sure if that was his play calling. Nick Sirianni, I like the role he's playing. I think he's really motivational. He's a culture setter, and him talking to everybody is not solely focused on the offense. I think that helped him more as well. So Kellen Moore just changing up everything. Jalen Hurts learning everything. Jalen Hurts taking that leadership role or becoming a bigger leader on the team, I should say, will really help Jalen Hurts, again, victim of a broken system. And that's why you bring in the Kellen Moore, because Kellen Moore, even himself, got a lot to prove. I was actually watching ESPN the other day, and Ryan Clark and these guys brought up a good point. While they was somewhat bashing Saquon Barkley, which I didn't even talk about, but they did bring up like Vic Fangio and they brought up Kellen Moore, and this is what they had to say.
See him as the missing piece that vaults them over the top.
And that's my big thing as well. It's not even about Saquon Barkley, but D Wood. You mentioned Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. Kellen Moore is on his third team in 3 years, going from Dallas to Los Angeles and now Philadelphia. Vic Fangio was with Miami, and now he's here in Philadelphia. D Wood, do you believe that these coordinators do have what it takes to get them back to the Super Bowl?
I believe so. I think that you work with Kellen Moore and what he did with the Dallas Cowboys, what he did with the Los Angeles Chargers, and listen, the Chargers situation obviously was a different situation with the head coach. But I think that he'll be able to provide, Kellen Moore I'm talking about, will be able to provide Jalen Hurts with a lot of answers to the test, because clearly when you watch this Philadelphia team on offense last year, they were very ordinary, very stagnant. They didn't have a lot of answers as far as what teams were doing as far as throwing things at them. I think Kellen Moore will be able to provide some of that for this Philadelphia Eagles offense.
Well, I guess Dallas is trash.
I totally agree. I totally agree. It's really up to, it's not about like the Saquons and all these signings. For the past 3 years, we've been making good signings. What Eagles fans know now, talent can win you a lot of games for sure, but what takes you over the hump is good coaching or even great coaching, because you've seen it. Shane Steichen, good players, well, great players, he takes them to the Super Bowl. Brian Johnson and these dudes, we had some really good players last year. Really good players. They was good enough to win 11 games, but once the system was figured out, no matter how good the players were not going anywhere. So it's really up to Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio. Can they take us over this hump? All right, so let's get into the last topic. The last topic is the Texans. Yes, the Texans. Will they make a trade with us? Because we got something that like can X each other out. So when you look into the Texas world, one of their biggest headlines is, will they address the depth at cornerback? Will they address the depth at cornerback? And one of the biggest headlines in Philadelphia, well, we got too many corners. Do we need another wide receiver 3? Do we need another linebacker or anything like that? And look, they got John Mechie III. They got Robert Woods over there. Of course, they're not trading like Tank Dell or like Diggs or anything like that, or even Noah Brown or Nico Collins. But when you look at like John Mechie III, who can still play at a high level, or like Rob Woods, who still probably want playing time, those dudes could come in and really compete for a wide receiver 3 spot. Now, what both teams are probably thinking, the Eagles and like the Texans, they probably thinking it's like, yo, well, let's just wait and see who get cut. Like James Bradbury might get cut. They probably don't have to give up anything. Us, Mitchie the third or something like that, Rob Woods, and Texans might get cut. So both teams probably don't have to give up anything. But to get ahead of the curve, I don't know why they just won't trade with each other. Now, I'm not bashing out wide receivers at all, like the backup ones. It's just the jury is still out. Like, I think Johnny Wilson's too big to be a wide receiver 3. I think he'd be more of a backup for like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. You got Joseph Nagata, who showed promise, but to me, when I watched him in the preseason last year, his hands are just skeptical to me. But he do show a lot of promise. Anaya Smith, I'm not sure about him. Far as injury wise, I keep hearing about this injury. And then, no offense to him, I didn't really hear any noise far as OTAs. But I like what I seen far as in college, but I didn't really hear any noise. But it was only shorts and shirts. We'll see him with the pass, and I think that's when he will show his strength. Paris Campbell, injury history. Then you have John Ross with the injury history, who even retired, who can have a great story. But if you want to bring in the most competition as possible, I think John Mechie, yeah, he will bring some competition. Rob Woods, yeah, he will bring some competition. So I think these two teams should talk to each other. Like, look, we got the corners. Y'all got the receivers. Let's talk. Or again, they might just be waiting for potential cuts, see what happens, or maybe an injury or something. Who knows what they waiting for? Because I haven't even seen any moves from any team. So maybe they just waiting for potential cuts when teams start cutting down. Even though I think this year they got that one day they just cut everybody basically, which sucks. But we'll see. We'll see. But I think the Eagles and the Texans will be really good trade partners. But hey, man, what do you think? How do you feel about the news today? List season. How do we feel about the top 10 worst draft picks and the Eagles list or whatever about this guy? Also, Jalen Hurts being the victim of a broken system. And should we make a trade with the Texans? But this is Eagle Al, man.